You are listening to the e-flux podcast.
Hello, today's e-flux podcast originated from a postponed book launch scheduled to take place at e-flux in New York for Red Love, a reader on Alexandra Kollontai. The episode will begin with the 6-minute reading of a letter from the editors that opens the book, then go into conversation with Maria Lind, Michele Masucci, and Joanna Warsza. You can find more information and a link to the book in the show notes.
Dear Alexandra, Stockholm is so cold without you. How have you been? We have missed you. We find ourselves thinking of you often in this place. We too have traveled to this country to work on making change, albeit in other ways than you. Lately, we've been reading your writings again. It seems we're finally able to understand what you were trying to tell us all along. That love is not merely a private matter concerning individuals, but an inherently political and social force. The history you trace through the writings of Engels, Bebel, Meisel Hess, and others, from ancient times through feudalism to the bourgeois era, has helped us to understand love as historically and materially determined, how the organization of love, sex, and social relations are integral to the formation of any society and must be considered in order to change that society. Today, your ideas are being rediscovered in calls for a form of love defined by multiplicity, a love of many in many ways, that may become a powerful organizing principle and model for collective action in the formation of the commons.
Yet how can we understand such form of love beyond the familiar structures within which it is currently contained? As in your analysis of your own bourgeois society, we still find love expressed through the forms of property relations and social control of the body as a result of unequal power relations between men and women. And of course, it is the woman question for which you came to be known. Your long and difficult struggles to improve the conditions of women's lives laid the foundation of our battles and the advances that followed in time. In spite of your fight for women's rights, you refused to be satisfied with the bourgeois feminist pursuit of equality on its terms, demanding instead the full emancipation of women and the workers from repressive system. You understood then how these struggles intersected, how the fight for women had to coexist and develop alongside the revolutionary fight. In your writings, you proposed a comradely love that went beyond sexual or familiar relations, even beyond friendship, to form the basis for collective solidarity. Perhaps it is there we should look for the answer to our question.
In spite of the growing equality of men and women during those years, many have since gendered the revolution as intrinsically male. One of your greatest contributions was to bring the relation between gender and economics into the political sphere. Yet we struggle to understand what you wanted to achieve. Was masculinity an ideal that you believed the new woman must embody? As the only woman member of the Bolshevik Central Committee, it must have been hard for you. Yet your fundamental calls for a revolution in which the members of society could form new bonds through a transformed love drew not on the hard rationality of the male sphere, but from the knowledge and resources of the female. In this, we have come far in our understanding of how masculinity and femininity are just two spheres in a wide spectrum of ways we can perform gender. We've learned many things about how gender is constructed socially through performative and linguistic gestures, habits, and perceptions, undermining supposed biological determinism to pave the way for non-binary, trans, and third gender politics to come to the fore. Such nonconformity extends to sexual politics and morality in a manner you could hardly have foreseen in your calls for free love. Now, undermining heteronormativity is at the fore, and understanding how the discourse of queer may yet enable a more fluid state of love. Perhaps such new knowledges may yet inform our revolutionary struggles.
Though the logic of capital continues to penetrate every aspect of our lives, signs of hope are emerging. Inspired by your life choices, which were ripe with contradictions and conflicts, we seek directions. For example, we keep wondering how it was possible for you to be Stalin's diplomat. In spite of the challenges we face, we are witnessing a renewed spirit of self-organization that brings back memories of you, standing among the workers and calling them to action. Waves of solidarity and collective action emerge, and a small hope for change blossoms again. New problems arise that ask us to find new tools, and they are certainly needed now.
It brings us great joy to think of you here in Stockholm. Your exile must have been hard for you, but we like to think about you walking these streets before us. As you had done in Russia for so many years, you gave speeches and wrote articles on women question, engaging with and inspiring the women's movement here, where you met your dear friend Ada Nilsson. As always, your presence had such a profound impact on those around you. Every day, we see your name carved on the wall in Östermalmstorg's subway station and think of the traces of your life we have yet to discover.
A sense of urgency calls us to action. We wrote this letter to let you know of our activities in this city you once called home. Once again, we have gathered around the questions you asked all that time ago, but we still have so many questions for you. We wish you were here. You would, of course, help us to understand what to do. We're getting tired, yet still we continue some of the work you started. All is yet to be done. Your readers in Stockholm: Dora García, Ellie Grimes, Malin Huber, Nicholas John Jones, Maria Lind, Michele Masucci, Martina Nowicka-Wojnowska, Alessandra Prandin, Dimitrina Sevova, Sofia Tabatadze, Hanna Zafiropoulos, Federico Del Vecchio, Joanna Warsza. This letter was penned on behalf of all those people by Hanna Zafiropoulos.
And we are actually here as 3 editors out of this group of 12 people, 12 editors, who have worked together on a reader called Red Love, which is bringing back the legacy of a person that we penned this letter to, an extraordinary person, Alexandra Kollontai. And somehow we'll try to walk you through her main ideas and her main achievements. My name is Joanna Warsza. I'm a Program Director of CuratorLab at Konstfack University in Stockholm. And I'm here with Maria Lind, who back then was the director of Tensta konsthall, and we collaborated together. And Michele Masucci, who was a guest lecturer of CuratorLab and is an artist and a writer. And so let's start even, this love letter, our love letter to Alexandra Kollontai brings already some of her main ideas, but she herself, as a Bolshevik revolutionary, as a writer, as a political advocate, as a mother, she has described in one of the texts, and actually it was a text called Autobiography of Sexually Emancipated Communist Woman that she penned in 1926. She said, "I have lived many lives." And you, Michele, in one of the opening essays of the book, you also write about many, many lives of Alexandra Kollontai. So why don't we start actually by saying what were those lives of Alexandra? Which lives did she live? Maybe, Maria, we would like to start by maybe speaking about her coming of an age and her political education, coming out of the Wedlock family. And then, Michele, why don't you continue?
To start with, she was one of the major intellectuals and political activists of the 20th century. And she became known as the first ever female minister in a government, the first ever ambassador. And she was somebody who had an extensive writing practice. She wrote fiction, she wrote essays, she wrote reports, and she was really an activist. And this all started in St. Petersburg, where she was born in 1872 into a noble family, but her parents were not married when she was born. So socially speaking, she came out of unusual circumstances. And she began her political interest and engagement in the 1890s, which led her to working with female factory workers in her hometown. And also she started writing there. Eventually, she became a Menshevik and had to go into political exile. Most of the 19 teens she spent abroad, for instance, in Norway and Sweden, but also partly in Germany and France. And then eventually she became involved with the Bolsheviks and was part of the first Bolshevik government. She was, as always, a critically thinking person. So she also detected severe problems with her own party and voiced this criticism, the so-called workers' opposition around 1920. And she was pushed out into the cold and she was made into a diplomat, first in Oslo, then in Mexico City, and eventually for 15 years as the ambassador to Sweden of the Soviet Union between 1930 and 1945. And she, after that, was called back to Moscow, where she lived until she passed away in 1952.
Yeah, I mean, when you read Kollontai's own biographies and when you read about her in the different scholarships that are, you're struck by the fact that she really lived history of the time. She was really a person that went through different moments in time and took her right and her liberty. Of course, she came from a privileged background, but as a woman of her time, she took that possibility and really traveled and transformed herself. That's one of the most inspiring things, I think, about Kollontai. She really transformed herself in several times throughout her life and lived history in many different capacities, and we can follow that through her writing. So it's a very exciting person to study, I think.
When one talks about Alexandra Kollontai, I think one should talk about the legacy of Kollontai, and that legacy is both her work and her life, because she lived her ideas. She practiced what she preached. And one of those things was free love. She married somebody against the will of her parents. She actually decided to leave her young child with its father and her parents to go and study economics, basically, in Switzerland. Eventually, she divorced and she had a rich emotional and sexual life that also became a bit of talk of the town in many towns. And she also thematized this in her writing in the most charming and also erudite ways, because one of the texts that she wrote, Winged Eros, looks at how the notion of love has evolved from the ancient Greeks until her own time. And it's a very astute and useful analysis.
I will come back to this, exactly to this text, and I'll ask you a little bit more. But I just wanted to add a little bit to the biographical line here, that when she got a position of the Commissar of Social Welfare in 1917, it was like an extraordinary moment of the opening of certain ideas she and her peers have been fighting for. And just wanted to list 3 or 4 things that were introduced under this government. For example, the right to contraception, free childcare, abortion was legalized. So in many, many years before Western countries did that. And equality for children born out of wedlock was introduced, among many other reforms. But I think it's just interesting to point certain things that have been part of her political engagement.
I think homosexuality was legalized also, actually.
Yeah, pretty extraordinary time. But actually, so coming back to the concept of love and comradely love, right? Our red thread throughout this book is, and we've been studying somehow, her concept of love. And she was saying that, the revolution has to be thought in terms of reinventing the relation between men, women, and children. And love is revolutionary in helping this out. So how do you see her concept of love as being revolutionary, and what exactly is comradely love? Maybe Michele, you could start saying what is.
Yeah, I think Michael Hart's essay in the reader Red Love has this very good presentation, and one of the sentences that sort of summarize a lot of her thinking, I think, is this love of many in many ways. And I think you have to sort of place yourself in the conditions of the time. So it's Tsarist Russia. You have bourgeois family relations being the norm, even among peasants and poor people. The sexual morality is very much based on a heteronormative couples relationship. The woman is very much subjected, and just some years before, in the 19th century, women were basically viewed as serfs, as objects. Legally, they had very few rights, and the women's organizations that Kollontai was part of fought for better conditions in many ways. And one of the central points that many of the comrades, her male comrades, kept missing was the aspects of what you would say the social reproductive aspects of life. They generally, Lenin, Trotsky, so on, focused on the productive aspects, productive relationships of society, and missed the so-called women questions, the women's issues. They were seen as less important issues. And in that analysis of how being pregnant, what conditions you would live as a proletarian woman, being pregnant or a factory woman, in that analysis, in those experiences, came also an understanding of that the love relationships had to be put forth as very important political issues to deal with as a communist or as a socialist revolutionary project.
And actually, Maria, you mentioned this important text of hers, Make Way for Winged Arrows. Can you speak a little bit about this trajectory of love she's kind of taking us through?
So she takes us through the situation where women, wives and daughters, were basically the property of their fathers or husbands, and how the idea of romantic love comes with the Middle Ages, courtly love, platonic love, going through the romantic period where the emphasis on emotions was handed over to the woman, so to speak. And she was not denying the importance of having a rich emotional life, but the way it was played out throughout history was something she found very problematic. And it's also interesting how she then takes the idea of love into camaraderie, and she coins the term comradely love. So for her, this is love also between friends, between colleagues, between affiliates, between comrades, as it were. And in her case, there are some beautiful friendships that she sustained throughout her life. So one of them was a childhood friend, Zoya, who also became a person on the fringes of the Bolshevik party and the revolution, who often came to see her when she lived abroad. When she was the ambassador to Sweden, she befriended the Swedish suffragettes, the women who really fought for the vote and made the victory in terms of women winning the vote in Sweden. And they were focused around a citizen school for women practicing citizenship once they had formally won the vote. And they were really close friends. And I have particularly enjoyed reading Kollontai's letters to some of them, specifically Ada Nilsson, who was a doctor who focused on women and medicine connected to women. It's so you can tell that it was a special relationship, and there was as much investment in it as you would traditionally see in a, let's say, couple relationship.
Mm. No, for me, absolutely revolutionary is this thing that love is not a private matter between two people, but can be taken out in the public sphere, and both in how we understand attraction or sex or desire, but also how it can be used actually for the common good, right? That attraction, it doesn't need to be communicated only with this one person you're attracted to, but somehow you can use this emotion, use this special state in order to bring something to the society. And of course, actually, why I think the reasons why we also studied her is that she resonates so much with the second wave of feminism, and again today. And when we look through the history, there was in the 60s and the 70s, early 70s, there was a big wave of re-interest in Kollontai, and actually we lived one of these other moments, I guess, today. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think actually it's important to read her again today?
Who wants to start? Well, she's important in very many ways. I think, just as Maria explained, she practiced her theories basically, and in a way, I think many are experienced at a moment of crisis. They're in many ways, liberal democracies have not delivered on the question of women's rights as we would hope or has been hoped. And we are looking for, I think many people are looking for alternatives. They're looking for other ways of structuring our societies, other organizing principles for our societies. And in one way or another, Kollontai provides different concepts and possibilities to think our relationships differently. So capitalist social relationships are, if you would summarize, are based on individualism, competition, and property relations. Basically, this really penetrates all aspects of our lives, even though we can share mutual love and share. I mean, love is not absent, but definitely conditioned by the productive relations in this society. And Kollontai theorizes and also provides a lot of. She was an excellent political pedagogue, and I think when you read her, you really get excited about trying this out seriously. And we'll try to be more, comradely today, kind of. And in that sense, she was thinking of this love potential. How can we sort of rehearse communism here and now, and not think of a future distant path where we'll reach all the perfect conditions that then will be the freedom we're looking for. Now, yes, here and today are the moments where we have to exercise this love potential that she was talking about. And there are also very concrete problems. You have femicide, you have domestic violence, you have a lot of problems, transgender violence against transgender people. So there's so many issues that sort of haven't been resolved with even with liberal democracies and the rights that they provide in different ways. So I think her also capacity to connect the psychic aspects and the political material aspects into this very powerful concepts are one of the reasons so many people are turning towards her today.
But one of the reasons she's not so well known as, for example, Rosa Luxemburg, who was actually born almost the same year and was very much her collaborator. Back then, they both studied in Zurich and were in touch together also with Clara Zetkin. But Kollontai didn't go down as well in the history, also because she stayed a Stalin diplomat for all these years, right? She stayed. She was the only person from the first Lenin government who died next to Stalin. I mean, also Stalin and her in her own bed, so to say. Yeah. So not eliminated by Stalin. She was part of his regime. How do you see this dilemma actually of staying in the system and kind of course, staying away from Soviet Russia, but representing her? Maria, do you have something to say?
When you read her diaries and her letters, and they've been quite extensively published, you understand what a dilemma this was for her. Of course, some of it has been redacted. The sources are in the archives in Russia, and we do not know if they are really what is published is really the original. But even in what is published, it's a lot of tension, and she's conflicted, and you can tell how she is suffering, particularly in the 30s during the purges, when many of the people who were close to her, including her ex-husband, were executed. And she was herself called back to Moscow a couple of times from Stockholm, and she handed over her private papers to this friend, Ada Nilsson, because she really believed that she would also be eliminated herself. So I think it was a survival strategy. I'm sure she was anxious to stay alive herself. At the same time, as it seems to me that she so strongly believed in the Soviet Union as a political necessary experiment at that time, that it was worth living through this in order to make the good parts of the system survive and develop further.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to go back briefly to your previous question, Joanna, because what is also attractive and enticing with Kollontai is that she both lived what she believed in. So she constantly put things into practice. She wanted to try things in her private life, in her professional life, in her activities as an activist. And simultaneously, she was writing these utopian short stories about the future. So it was both graspable here and now, trying things out, and visionary.
Yeah. And
one of the visionary utopian short stories is called Soon, and it was set in 1970, which for her was far in the future. and the world and the relationships that she describes there are very radical and equal and so on. But there is one thing that stands out as not so, how should I say, supportable, something that maybe to many eyes today seem questionable, and that is the relationship to nature. Nature is something that is an enemy, that needs to be tamed, that needs to work in service of humankind. That doesn't ring so nicely.
But actually, this is maybe one of the reasons why to read her today, because her politics of care, even if it's not that present in her own writing, of course, can expand in what we understand today as interdependency, as staying with the trouble, thinking of planetary citizenship with other species. And this is, I would argue, a possible continuation of her politics of care and love, understood beyond the human relations, I guess, only. But let's go maybe now a little bit zoom into our reader, because what we have to say, I guess, is that this reader doesn't contain a single text of Alexandra Kollontai, right? Those texts can be found easily actually online, and they have been widely published. And so what we try to do is how today certain readers, certain thinkers, certain artists think through her and about her. So it's impossible to speak of all the texts, but why don't we bring one or two of them? For example, Dora García, an artist with whom we worked alongside this route and who had done a beautiful exhibition at Tensta Konsthall as a result somehow, and who continues to work with Alexandra Kollontai. And Maria, maybe you can say a little bit about, actually Dora García herself says in one of the interviews that her interest in love started when she realized its political potential. So how does Dora, through Kollontai, work with love?
The exhibition at Tensta Konsthall was called Red Love, and it was developed alongside our collective research with you, Joanna, Michele, all the participants in the CuratorLab course that year. And she was interested in the contradictions with her being a radical and a brave person taking a lot of risk at the same time as she maybe was a bit confined. So one of the elements in the installation was a big wooden structure that doubled as a cage and a workspace, maybe Kollontai's office in Stockholm. And she also involved some other simple visual figures, let's say, like a big red square on the floor, like a Malevich square, becoming the platform, the pedestal for the whole project, upkeeping everything we did as a kind of gesture towards being visionary.
Mm.
And love itself, I think, is connected to her other research and work on love,
Of course,
which is a kind of multiform,
ongoing
hybrid form of love, not disregarding love in connection to those who are deprived of love for physical reasons or other reasons.
But Dora has been also recently tracing the influence of Kollontai in Latin America, right?
Yeah, this is a continuation that started with our research project and her exhibition. So she's making a film on the influence of Kollontai in Latin America. And she and I were able to do some archival research in Russia, in St. Petersburg and Moscow, thanks to a grant from Garage. And this is also involved in the new film.
Okay, and but let's bring something which is maybe a little bit less optimistic in the book, namely the text of Sara Ahmed. Because, when we speak of love as a guiding principle, of course, there was and there is one big movement already in the philosophy and practice, which privileges love. And this movement is called Christianity, where love comes first. And actually, Sara Ahmed has a little bit more pessimistic view on this. Michele, can you speak about this a little bit?
Well, I think when we were thinking about the reader, we, as you already mentioned, were thinking, how do we sort of bring Kollontai up to date? And of course, one of the issues is kind of post-humanist perspective, climate issues that she was not, of course, aware of. She was much more concerned on liberating the proletariat through any kind of means, really. And the other is the problematic of identity politics, a strong identity politics. And we witnessed that with Soviet Russia, what happens when you create strong collective identities that you have to follow. And Ahmed, in many ways, brings to this reader a very important voice and critique of how identity is formed and also can be formed through love. Love of the nation, love of the same. What is a love of the different, of the other, is one of her questions in this very important essay that we reprinted for the reader. So I think we always have to think of that when we read historical texts. What have we learned since, sort of? Yeah.
I have to say that my favorite text, I think, by far, is a conversation and a take on love and revolution by Bini Adamczak, who is an activist and an artist and a writer from Berlin. And she's actually speaking of a gender of revolution. And she speaks of the fact that the revolution failed because it was too much of a masculine gender. And everything which was, culturally speaking, considered as feminine was considered counter-revolutionary. Yeah. So somehow the revolution of 1917 failed because of too much belief in male gender, and the atmosphere of collaboration and atmosphere of care failed, was not there, was absent from it. And we can actually see she had to, Kollontai herself, because of voicing her discontent and disagreement in workers' opposition, had to leave the country herself in already 1921 or 22, right? Only 4 years after the revolution.
Yes.
So, and Bini is bringing this idea of a gender of revolution and saying, okay, there was another attempt in 1968. And in 1968 already, the idea of love and care and interdependency was there, but still the revolution was too much of a male gender. And how does it continue to today? I think this is really mind-opening reading of how love can be taken out of the private into the public.
Yeah, Bini's contribution is very nice, and I love this excellent example in the beginning of the interview, where she describes how this gossiping that actually women were doing made them more informed than many other male Bolsheviks. And I would say, of course, reducing the arguments that women were one of the major driving factors in many ways towards actually getting to the revolution. The anti-war protests, the strikes at the factories, women workers were actually part of the war efforts. So women were conscious of the labor relations and organized. They organized clandestinely, illegally, because the Tsarist police was watching over them, and formed different ways of organizing. And of course, when the power was in the hands of the party, the male sort of party elite took over and didn't want to hear about these other experiences, and that was a big mistake, I would say.
But even actually to add to this, the February Revolution started on the Women's Day with the women workers going out of the factory to strike. So actually the whole snowball effect. And back then Kollontai was also engaged in working in factories and creating support groups.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the tragic histories and eternal returns of the socialist projects of the 20th century, that women are very crucial in the organization and in the formation of the revolutionary moment, and then sort of a state, male gendered state, takes over and destroys all the more intimate and sensitive forms of organization, to generalize, of course.
Somebody who is elaborating a bit on an aspect of this is also Alla Mitrofanova in her essay Feminism is Our National Idea, where she points out how radical the legislation was in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, before it was rolled back by Stalin and his cohort, where, as you mentioned at the beginning, Joanna, unseen measures were taking in terms of legalizing abortion, making children born out of wedlock have the same rights as any child, etc. And this is kind of forgotten how progressive it was. It was short-lived, but it was there.
Yes, absolutely. And was only introduced years, if not decades later in other countries, actually. Yeah.
Precisely.
But actually, speaking of this moment of time, sometimes I had an impression that she was writing things she especially in the teens years, that she would not live up to. That's why maybe she penned so many of these futurist short stories, as if, and then the history went so fast and those things happened, they were introduced. And then again, it stopped and slowed down. And today, actually, when we record this podcast, we are in some kind of also a state of exception because of coronavirus and that situation. And I was actually curious if you have any thoughts of how actually is Kollontai useful when one thinks of corona, or in any way when one thinks of state of exception, since she went through so many state of exceptions.
I think she felt that she lived through a very long period of a state of exception in Tsarist Russia, which for her was an unacceptable, inhibiting situation for a majority of people in the country, and that she could not work under, let's say, normal circumstances. Nobody with a political interest, even vaguely related to hers, could do that. So they had to go into political exile.
Yeah, I think what many social democratic governments after the Second World War did were to institute welfare states, also as a response to the promises of the Soviet Union. as a response by liberal democracies and capitalist states in order to show that they did have a program in terms of taking care of their population. And of course, we can problematize that as well as you do. Foucault does brilliantly, but it's also very apparent today that the dismounting of these welfare states since the 80s, gradual dismounting, has struck very hard on especially the working class and people who don't access welfare state amenities and services. And this becomes even more apparent in a situation that we're living now with the coronavirus, where people are asked to take care of many things in their home, where women are again subjected to more domestic violence because they are confined in their home to take care of their children. And there is no really a state plan, or there is no form of organization which takes care of these different aspects of life, of reproducing life. Instead, the major measures are these kind of quick locking down and confining people and asking a lot from them, from the individual families. And I think Kollontai would have had another solution. She would definitely have had a state that definitely brought the resources to all the citizens in order to survive and have a good sort of existence throughout the crisis, to take a sort of responsibility of all aspects of life and not only survival in the sense that is being done now, where we are reduced to mere biology, mere life, basically.
I would like to highlight one part of the reader, which is actually a quarter of the reader, if we think about the number of pages, which is the first English translation of a play about Kollontai called Kollontai by the Swedish author Agneta Pleijel, who is a renowned literary figure with many novels and other texts on her bibliography. And this play was written in 1977. So as you said, Joanna, when the second wave of feminists discovered people like Kollontai and Rosa Luxemburg and others. So it's a fun play that looks at the tensions in Kollontai's life and the key people of her trajectory, such as her husband, Lenin, Stalin, but also her close female friends. And it was famously staged in 1979 at the main National Theatre in Stockholm, Dramatiska Teatern. And it was a big success, also thanks to the fact that it's kind of Dadaistic, with a time machine making the narrative move ahead on stage. So with this English translation, I hope that somebody will be interested in taking it and translating it into our time somehow.
Actually, Agneta Pleijel says herself, she thinks that the time is ripe for Kollontai again.
Yeah, she's right, I think also.
So I guess we'll round up here. Maybe we will just say at the end that the reader is accessible in the open access on the website of Konstfack University. So you can just download it and read it for yourself and somehow see what comes from the fact if somebody really insists on political change and possibility of the other futures.
And for the sake of formality, the reader is published by Sternberg Press, Konstfack, and Tensta Konsthall.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
Spread love, not corona.
Forever and ever.